Okay, we're going to go through some of the basics of setting up VeraCrypt and how to use it. And this is pretty much the same on Windows, OS X, and on Linux. The interface is almost identical. So first thing is obviously you need to download it. So you need to find yourself at this URL here, go to downloads, and then you need to get the version appropriate for your operating system, Windows, Linux, Mac OS X. Download, validate the signature against the file that you've got. It's very straightforward to install on all of those operating systems, so there's no need to run through that. And then once you run it, it looks like this, almost identical on all operating systems, as I said. So let's go through some of the basics. We want to create volumes, encrypted volumes. So click on here, encrypted volumes. And these are the three main options that you have here. So the first one, create an encrypted file container. And as it says here, creates a virtual encrypted disk within a file. It says here recommended for inexperienced users, but there can still be legitimate reasons for experienced users to want to create an encrypted file as a container. And then you have this option here, which is encrypt a non-system partition or drive. So as it says, it's non-system partitions, but it could also be flash drives as well, and other drives that you want to encrypt. And then the final option here is encrypting the system partition or the entire system drive. So this would be the full disk encryption option, or we could just do the system partition, and then the other partitions we could encrypt separately. And you could use different passwords for that as well. That can protect you from bootloader attacks. If you encrypt your system partition only, then you create separate partitions with data in, and encrypt those separately with a different password or different authentication. And of course, whole disk encryption is not available for anything other than Windows. So we're going to go through a file container here, but all of them are very, very similar as you go through. So let's go on next. What we're going to do this time is we're going to create a standard VeraCrypt volume, and then after I'll show you creating a hidden volume. So we're going to select the location. Now we could select a volume here, we could select a USB flash drive, but because we've selected a file container, we're going to select a file, or rather create a file actually. So let's create a file, so disk, save, next. And then we've got to choose the encryption. We can test the encryption here, we can benchmark the encryption, we can choose the hash algorithm. All the defaults are actually fine, but you can benchmark the encryption to see what is suitable on your platform. This may take a little while, but usually always AES is the best by a long way. And as we can see here, AES is much faster. Its closest competitor is much, much slower. So those are the options we're going to go with. And you can select your size here. This will be the size of the file. I'm just going to create a 10 meg file just for demonstration. And this is where we put in our extremely strong password if the contents deem it. I'm just going to put in a simple password here, and you can use two-factor authentication. So use key files. Now I can add a file here, and it can be most files, but MP3s are good, and you can also use this to generate your own key files. What it does is it uses so many bytes in the file and adds it essentially like a second password. But if this file gets destroyed, you're never going to be able to get access again, so this needs to be kept safe as well. Alternatively to the key file, or as well as, because you can add multiple, we can use a token here. So if we set up previously in settings and security tokens a PKCS number 11 token, then we could use that to generate a second factor as well. And you can see we've got generate random key file as well, if that's what we want to do. But usually it's best to use a file that's on your system because it's more discrete. It's much, much stronger to have a key file and a password, because even if your password is weak, your key file is really going to make up for that. And PIM means that we can add extra iterations to the encryption, or we can reduce the iterations of the encryption. This can make cracking a little bit more difficult. The default iterations is 485. Now if you do it less than that, it will mount quicker. If you do it more than that, it will mount slower. So I'm going to put in 491. And as it says here, you need to remember this number. If you don't have this number, you will not be able to decrypt the drive. Then we need to choose the file format. You need to choose this based on the sort of files that you want in there. So you'll need to understand the difference between FAT and NTFS, or whatever it is that you decide to choose. And we've got to move the mouse around to get randomness. Stick with the default cluster in most cases. You can choose dynamic, but as this says here, this will affect performance. Dynamic, by the way, dynamic container is a, as it says here, pre-allocated NTFS sparse file whose physical size, actual disk space used, grows as the data is used. So that can be useful if you're not quite sure how big the file is going to be, but the problem is it affects performance. So really you want to avoid using it if you can. And keep doing this until this is green. And format. Formatting can take a long time if you've got a big drive. It can take a very long time. So there we are. That volume has been created, that encrypted file container. Now we can decide to mount it now. So let's select the file, demo, disk, open, then mount. And here we are. We're going to have to use PIM. So if you remember, we had 491. Let's display passwords here. This is fine for auto detection. We used a key file as well, our second factor of authentication. So we need to add that as well, which was keyfile.mp3. Okay. And we need to enter our password as well, which was password. And there's mount options as well here. So we can mount it as read-only, as removable media, use a backup header, and we've got some options here. We've got a hidden drive, which we don't at the moment. So let's open that. And there we can see it. So we can see the size, we can see the encryption, we can see that this is normal and not hidden, and it is mounted to the Z drive. If I look here, we can see I've got a Z drive there. That is the encrypted volume. Quick properties. We can see there we've got our 10 meg disk, and we can dismount this. Now let's create a hidden volume. And again, as I said, this will be the same if it was a partition, basically the same sort of options. It is slightly different if you go through a full system partition encryption. There's more options to go through. So we're going to create a hidden. Now it's going to ask us if we want to do normal mode or direct mode. With direct mode, as it says here, if you select this option, you will create a hidden volume within an existing VeraCrypt volume. So if you have an existing volume, you can use this mode, but we're going to go with the normal mode where we create both the hidden and the normal container in one go. So next, select, demo, let's go with disk 2. So we're going to create the outer volume now. I'm going to go with these settings. I'm going to create one at 15 meg in size. Just have this as password, password. Warning that it's not long enough. Let's add some randomness with mouse movements. And format. Now what we want to do is open the outer volume, and we want to populate this with dummy data that looks genuine. This is our outer, our hidden volume. So add that there. Close that. Next. Now we're creating the hidden volume. I'm going to go with the standard options, and this one needs to fit within the other one. So you can see how this is 15 meg. I can go for 10 meg, but whatever I go for, the dummy files need to have enough space to fit in as well. So maybe we have 5 meg or 5 gig of dummy files. And of course this has to be a strong password. And of course it cannot be the same password. And you do this until it's green, format. And that's it, it's done. So now what we can do is if we select the disk, which was disk 2, then mount. Now based on the password, it'll either mount the normal or the hidden drive. So let's mount the normal one. So there we can see the normal one has been mounted to Z. Let's dismount that. And let's mount the drive. And let's put in the password for the hidden volume. And there you can see the hidden volume, only 10 meg. So that's how you create hidden volumes, hidden containers. And depending on the password, it will open one or the other. Something else that you might want to consider is creating a backup of your volume header. If your volume header ever gets corrupt, then you will not be able to mount your volume. So I recommend you back up your volume header and restore the header if you have any problems. For further guidance on VeraCrypt, you can check out the documentation, which is actually very good. And if you also go to download, you can download the full user guide here, which is definitely worth a read. This is it here, and it's pretty good generally just on crypto. So check that out. So there you go, that's some of the basics of VeraCrypt.